Good morning, Nelson. It's good to be here. Another beautiful Friday morning here in the FCT. Well, our table is loaded as always, so stay tuned.
Yeah, good morning, Nigerians, and thank God it's Friday. TJ, you had a very busy week with your birthday, so you have this weekend to yourself. Take some rest.
Well, you're supposed to take me out, so I'm waiting for that invitation.
We'll do that after that.
Let's take you into what we have for you today. Debates over policing structure in Nigeria have once again taken center stage as calls for decentralization grows louder across the country. At the heart of the conversation is the renewed push for state policing, a proposal many believe could reshape Nigeria's security landscape, now with Inspector General of Police Disu initiating moves aimed at reforming the nation's policing architecture. Questions are emerging about what these reforms could mean for coordination, accountability, and the overall effectiveness of law enforcement. Supporters argue that state police could bring security closer to the people, allowing quicker response to local threats and better intelligence gathering within communities.
But critics, however, warn of risk, potential political interference, uneven standards across states, and the challenge of balancing national cohesion with decentralized authority. As insecurity continues to test Nigeria's current policing framework, the discussion around structural reform is becoming more urgent and more complex. To delve into the implications of these proposed reforms and what they could mean for Nigeria's security future, we are joined this morning by Captain Bish Johnson, retired, a United States Army veteran and respected security strategist, who brings years of operational and strategic insight into policing systems and security sector reforms. And good morning, everyone, and welcome to FCT Brief Time. Captain Johnson,
good morning.
Nice to have you here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. It's no longer news that the Inspector General of Police, Olatunde Disu, has set up a committee to help draw up an operational framework for this decentralized policing or the state policing and all that. Now, you were with the U.S. Army, and from what you have seen, how best do you think this structure can really work in a system like Nigeria, where we have also a federal structure and we're talking about decentralization? So how do you think this committee can work to make a proposal that will benefit the system?
Again, good morning, and thank you for having me. I think it's been long overdue. I've been one of the proponents of decentralizing policing. I've been on this subject matter for close to a decade now. Because, look, it's very, very obvious that the central government alone cannot shoulder the responsibility of securing Nigeria. Nigeria is vast. Nigeria is huge, both landmass-wise and in terms of population. And the population is even growing. And so as the population grows, the need for security will also be growing. And so there is that need for us to decentralize policing. Policing is different from military. Okay? You don't have to decentralize your military, because the military, their job is to protect the territorial integrity, the integrity of the country. But the internal policing, which will be growing which will increase as population is growing, is necessary that it is decentralized. We are a federation, like you rightly pointed out. And at each level of our government, there are legislators, right? What does police do? The police enforces the laws that are made by these legislators. The federal police is supposed to enforce our federal laws. That's how it's done in every other federation. And I use the US as a typical example, not because I served there, but because if you look at our structure of government is very close to that of the United States. You have the FBI as their federal police, and every state has their own police. Every county, every borough, every city has their own police. Even universities have their own police. Because policing is a very difficult job. It has to do with socio-psychological problems. To solve crimes is complicated. And so, here in Nigeria, we have the National Assembly making federal laws, national laws. The states have state assemblies making their state laws. At the local government, they have councillors who are making ordinances at the local level. And so it's an aberration in terms of policing that we have one centralized police to enforce both the federal, state, and local laws. It's an aberration. I understand the fears of those who are opposed to it, but there is nothing we do in this life that does not have pros and cons. You just have to take your pros and your cons and you lay them side by side and you say which one outweighs. And then how do we safeguard or how do we mitigate the cons that is associated with whatever program or whatever project we are embarking upon. And so we can't dismiss this, the challenges that we face today, particularly insecurity, is so huge that the responsibility of securing the country cannot be left to the federal government alone. Yeah. As it stands right now, on the book, the state governors are seen as the chief security officer of their state, but in practice they are not. You cannot hold any state governor responsible for security breaches within their state because they will tell you that they don't control any apparatus of security in their state.
All right, Captain Bish. Now that the new Inspector General of Police, Disu, has inaugurated a committee that will see to the eventual implementation of the state policing, how would you advise that he ensures that there is no fragmentation or rivalry within the Nigerian police force itself and the state police?
Well, if you look at FBI and state police in the U.S., everybody has their jurisdiction, the laws that they enforce, right? And when I started, I said the National Assembly makes law for the entire country. The national police should be enforcing those laws that are made by the National Assembly. The state police should enforce the laws that are made by their various state assemblies. And if we go down to local, the local police should enforce those ones that are made by the councillors within that local government. So the jurisdictions will be well spelled out, which areas should be well spelled out, which areas should state police enforce, and which areas should the national police enforce. We need to get to a point where, because we live in an era where you have transnational border crimes, terrorism, and all these highly sophisticated crimes. So for us to have our national police going to prosecute people who stole goat or who stole chicken, when we have criminals that are crossing border to terrorize us. I'm not trying to diminish the stealing of goat and chicken. They're still criminal activities. But for us to have our national police going to prosecute those that stole chicken and goat, rather than focusing on how to stop bandits from crossing our borders to come and kill us here in Nigeria, for me, it makes no sense of the whole situation.
Okay, you just raised something that is very vital. If we are decentralizing, some have said we decentralize along the line of states, authorities, some say along the line of regional. We have 6 geopolitical zones and all that. We need to take into cognizance which do we have a regional authority for the policing, or should we have state authority? Now, the other aspect is, you said the federal police will enforce laws made by the National Assembly. Now, but we still have the federal courts. So, if you talk about enforcing the laws, the same laws that is to be enforced by these states, the state police, we still go to the federal courts. So is it a system where we, as we are decentralizing, we must also decentralize our judicial system?
Our judiciary is already decentralized. It's just that we just take all this whole thing and we mumble them up. There are state high courts, don't they? We have state high courts and we have federal high courts. You see, this country, I don't know how we got to where we are today. We are a federation, but in many aspects of our life, we just take everything, we just jam them together. They have chief justices of the states. They have state courts. They even have state prisons. But in implementation is where we have the problem. And the reason why I think we have that problem is because of this using one police to just police both the federal and state and the states. Judiciary is already decentralized. So we should make it practical by decentralizing the police as well, so that state police can enforce state laws and let the federal police enforce our national laws that are made by our National Assembly.
Alongside strengthening...
And then you mentioned something about region. Let me address the regional thing. There is nowhere in our law, where in our constitution, that geopolitical zones are recognized. There are no legislators at the regional level. So I would discourage the regional thing because it does not follow our federal structure. If we want to do regional policing, then we have to ensure that the regions are also recognized in our constitution.
Indeed.
And then you will not have a government at that level as well.
All right, indeed, Captain Bish, but you hold that thought because we need to take a quick commercial break now. Don't go anywhere. We'll still have more for you on the program. Stay with us, Robert. Thank you for staying with us. We are still discussing the reform of policing architecture in Nigeria. Now, strengthening the police force is one thing, and then public trust is another thing. You agree with me that, you know, trust in the public trust in the Nigerian police force as it stands is very low. Now, if we're talking, we have a trust problem, and we're talking state policing, and people don't even trust the force that is already in place. How do we expect that even if this state policing is being institutionalized, you know, it will gain the trust of the people, and, you know, it won't be abused, you know, by the powers that be?
I have stated that everything we've done and we do in life has pros and cons. Now, when you come to the issue of trust, it's not only police that is not trusted by the people. Even our government is not trusted by our people. So should we say because we don't trust the government, therefore we should not have government? We have to have government. But government must do whatever is needed to gain the trust of the people. The police must do what is needed to regain the trust of the people. Now, for the state police, we don't have one yet. So you can't prejudge them and declare that because you don't trust the federal police, therefore, if we have state police, you're not going to also trust them. They must be given the opportunity to prove themselves. Now, this issue of decentralizing the police has to be very, very holistic. Like as I was mentioning, as I stated to you during the break time, where you have a federation, let me tell you, you see, the essence of democracy is that when you ask a people to go and govern themselves, you must also allow those people to be able to secure themselves. So we have a situation in Nigeria where we have asked the states to go and govern themselves, but we didn't give them the opportunity to also secure themselves. There are state elections, we conduct state elections, elect governors, elect National Assembly, we do local government elections, but we are not allowing those states, the sub-nationals, the components, the units that made up the federation to be able to secure themselves. And that is against one of the tenets of a democracy, is to ask people to go and govern themselves, and at the same time not allow them to be able to secure themselves. Can you imagine a situation where Nigeria is recognized as a nation by the United Nations, right? But United Nations comes and says, look, you can't secure yourself. We have to be the one that will secure you. It doesn't make any sense. Okay. Now, the decentralization and reforming has to be holistic, because now you have to have federal offenses and federal crimes, which the national police has to concentrate on. You will now have state offenses, which the state police have to be enforcing. But they have to work hand in hand, because if, for example, I commit a crime in Rivers State and I cross state line to another state, it has become a federal offense, because now I had gone outside the jurisdiction of the Rivers State Police. So it has to be holistic. We have to look at every other aspect, including the judiciary, as you mentioned, because even in places where they have state police, they have all their courts, all the way to the Supreme Court. Georgia has Georgia Supreme Court. That if it's a state offense, it runs its course to their own Supreme Court.
Okay, Captain, there's something also that in Nigeria we have multiplicity of agencies, even security agencies. Of recent, we have the Forest Guard. That is a federal initiative, and I think the states are responsible to help recruit. We have the Security and Civil Defense Corps. which is a federal agency, and some of the functions of the civil defense. We have the forest guards carrying out those functions. Now, when we're talking about this reform of this state police and all that, are those things also, do we need to put them also in perspective so that we have a robust system? So it's not just that the police we want to take a look at. Every other structure that has to do with the authority of a state, do we have to put them also on board and have a holistic examination how they can seamlessly operate?
Yes. There are some crimes that are specialized crimes. For example, financial crimes. You see, we are not reinventing the wheel. Some of all these things that we are advocating for here in Nigeria are already being practiced in other places. That's why, personally, when the committee that was constituted by the IGP was given 4 weeks to turn in their report, I personally don't think that 4 weeks is enough. I don't want a situation where we're going to do this thing haphazardly. We have to look at this thing very, very holistic from a very broad perspective. Like as you have mentioned, should the states also have the ability to also prosecute financial crimes in their own state? Should they have their own EFCC? Should they have their own civil defense? Should they have their this? Should they have their that? If you go to all these places that we are copying, those things do exist. If you go to Georgia, for example, Georgia has GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigation. They also have their state troopers, okay, which is like equivalent of a police or road safety. So this thing has to be looked into very, very holistically, so that when we are implementing, we implement this thing holistically so that they can work. If we do it haphazardly, we are going to come back to where we are today, or even worse off. So I personally do not think that 4 weeks is enough for these people to give us this framework and turn in their report. I think they should be allowed some time to even go to other places where these things are being practiced and see what they are doing there and what they can copy from those places. Like as I said, we are not reinventing the wheel. We are copying what is already being done in other places, and they have done them very effectively.
Right.
And so we should look at what all those other people are doing.
Captain Bishop, I like the fact that you mentioned that implementation is not just about, for the sake of the word, is to implement it effectively to ensure that it works. Now, if we look at the Nigerian police force, they have a welfare problem. So does all our security architecture have this welfare problem. And whenever they come, to the National Assembly, they always present this problem. They have an issue of funding. Now, we're saying that adding more security architecture is what will solve the problem. But when the men in the force are demoralized because of poor welfare, and we're adding more men, how do we expect to fund them? And how do we hope that, the situation doesn't deteriorate and even become more of a problem as it stands?
Yes. We have funding issues because we are wasteful. Mm-hmm. Nigeria is one of the most wasteful countries on the planet. You just saw what happened with even promotion of police officers to IGP, where the career of 29 other the most senior and most experienced police officers was on the line because there was a new IGP. And some of these officers are his senior. Therefore, the tradition is that they must be forced to retire without considering how much money we've spent in training them. And just about the time we are supposed to tap into their expertise and their experience, they will be forced to retire. The same thing happened in our military. You see, this police restructuring and decentralization is not something that should be done in isolation of other aspects of our life. There are various areas of the states that the federal government encroaches upon and makes revenue from, where the states ought to be making their own revenue. So these things can't be something that you do in isolation. They have to look at all these things holistically. There are some regulatory agencies. For example, I saw a signpost about birth and death registrations of the Ministry of Interior in Imo State. I was like, how can Ministry of Interior be registering births and deaths in Imo State when this ought to even be the responsibility of the local government. So if you look at all of all these things, for example, registration of vehicles. Registration of vehicles is done by, the road safety does that, a driver's license. These are the things that ought to fall within the jurisdiction of the states. And the states can make revenue from all these things and be able to pay for this policing that we are talking about. And again, if you cannot protect lives and property, you shouldn't exist as a government. Okay. In fact, that is your only responsibility. Every other thing you're doing are secondary.
Captain, something just came up to my mind now. This committee was set up by the IGP. Now, shouldn't we elevate this committee to the level of the presidency, in the sense that people say in Nigeria you have a committee set up, then later you have a white paper, you now have another committee to look into what that committee set up. Because of this holistic reform we're talking about, shouldn't it be something that is beyond what the IGP should just set up, because it will cut into several other sectors, so that we have a body, something set up now that will do a holistic reform just beyond what the police is thinking, because other agencies will be involved?
Yes. I think that what they are trying to do, this is my own assumption, I don't know. I don't think it's going to end with the committee that was set up by the IGP. I think that the committee that was set up by the IGP is just to look at the framework on how the thing is going to work. I expect that the thing will be elevated to the presidential level, where there, like you said, there will be another committee, because the thing is far beyond the Nigerian police. And any report that comes from Nigerian police will tether more towards them, because you can't give what you don't have. Their experience is in policing. So most of the things that is going to come out of their report is going to move towards them. I am looking at a very robust implementation committee that will involve members of the Nigerian Bar Association, civil society groups, that will expand and look at this thing holistically, so that we don't do one haphazard thing and end up with something that Boy Scouts are going to be better off. And we also don't end up with something that is going to make our situation even worse off than it is. The complaints that are being raised about state police and state governors abusing them, I'm also concerned about those as well, including tribal, religious discrimination, all these things. We have to provide safeguards to some of all these things, so that we don't have a situation where we have a state police that will be similar to Hizbah. That's what they call the enforcement agencies in the state agencies in the north, where they are trying to enforce Sharia laws and stuff like that. So we don't end up in state police that is going to go there to go and enforce Sharia laws. There have to be these safeguards.
Now, we can't rule out the fact that corruption exists within the force. And this corruption is often described as systemic rather than, individual. Now, if an institution that is saddled with the responsibility of enforcing law is struggling with impunity such as this, what is now the way forward?
Now you're talking about fighting corruption. Well, fighting corruption will not be the only. It's not only the police alone that can fight corruption. I think corruption, like you rightly said, pointed out, is a societal problem. Because if you look at all of the agencies, and even the ones that we're talking about that we need to come on board, right? You're going to be recruiting from the society. And it's the same society that you're recruiting that you also have in these agencies. So it's a societal problem which must be addressed at a presidential level. If you look at China and what the Chinese are doing, they even go outside the borders of their country to go and hunt down and bring the corrupt officials back to the country to prosecute them. By the time we take the issue of prosecution of corrupt officials very seriously and hold them accountable for their actions and inactions while they are in office, if you do it one administration, next administration after that, and it becomes a tradition and a culture, I think the society will sit up.
Okay, Captain, you just mentioned the issue of national security, talking about the terrorism, the banditry, and all that. And a lot of time they say these people cross over, that our borders are very porous. And, traditionally, it's not the responsibility of the military to police the borders. They protect the national the country from external aggression. You have the customs, you have the immigration. Now, but for there to be effective policing of our borders, in some climes they have the border security.
Yeah, sure.
Now, should we begin to think that way because we have the forest guards, because we have a peculiar challenge in our forest? Now, our borders are porous, and you can't really pin down which of these present agency has that responsibility or is failing in its responsibility to keep our borders. Should we begin to think about this serious security threat from our borders and have a commission or whatever that its primary responsibility is to police the border?
Well, the agency with the statutory responsibility to police our borders is Nigerian Immigration Service. They have Directorate of Border Security and Management within the Nigerian Immigration Service. But I personally don't think that our border should be a directorate thing. I had made a proposal for this, what you just said now, border security, as an agency of itself. Because the border security has become a very serious problem in Nigeria. Most of the insecurity that we have in this country is being brought upon us from our neighbors. Yeah. We are surrounded by very poor neighbors who see Nigeria as an El Dorado. They see Nigeria like those in how those in Latin America see the United States, as a place where as soon as they land, their life has changed. This is how these people in our borders see our country. Okay. And so it's a serious problem. Therefore, we have to get to the point that we have to elevate. I know we've talked about multiplicity of agencies and how they are overlapping with each other. Right, however, as I stated earlier, some crimes are specialized, and you need specialized agencies that will focus on that, lesser focus on dealing with those particular crimes.
Very, very quickly, in just 30 seconds, the military have sometimes taken hold of, the internal security, replacing what the police should be doing. Now, would you say, in your own words, that this is a failure of the policing structure that we have in Nigeria? Just very quickly.
It's a failure of Nigeria itself, because the reason why the military is called upon in aid of civil authority is because civil authority, if you look at it, let's be honest to ourselves, Nigerian police doesn't have the manpower, the capacity to do to police Nigeria. So the military has to come in to assist them. But if we grow their capacity to the point where they ought to be, there may not be any need for us to use the armed forces in doing internal security.
Well, thank you so much, Captain. It's always a pleasure speaking with you on these security matters and always hearing your insight. Thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being a part of our conversation. That's where we'll draw the curtain for the week, but we'll see you next week, same time. But we'll hand you over to Lagos, where Ibrahim is standing by to continue with the rest of the show.
Thank you very much, Disu and Thank you so much, Abuja.